Today is Friday, October 5th, 2018, and I'd like to introduce Diane Loper. She's an early activist in the domestic violence and women's movement in Nevada. This interview is being done through the generosity of the Roxie and Azad Joseph Foundation. Welcome, Diane. Tell me about your formative years.
Well, I was born on February 21st, 1930, and in a farming district in southwestern Colorado, on a farm. I was there for 18 years. It was a little different than it is growing up now. I learned to milk cows, I learned to ride a horse, I learned to drive a tractor before I drove a car. And I picked string beans in the field, my dad's string bean field, with the migrant workers. I got paid the same amount. I think my father would have loved to have had a boy, but he had two girls, myself and Kay. But he never treated us different. We didn't know that. We didn't know that he would have liked to have had a boy. My father never made me feel like I could or couldn't do anything. And during my first schooling, I went to school in a two-room schoolhouse. The potbelly store in each room, and an outhouse out on the playground, out on the far side of the playground. It was very uneventful, actually. So then I went to high school in a town of about 500-600 people, and it was fun. Pretty uneventful too. I was a member of the drama club and the National Honor Society, junior senior plays, but because it was small, we only had 35 people in our
In your whole school?
class, and so everybody pretty much had to be in the play. I went as a freshman in college. I went to Washington State College in Gunnison. The best thing that happened was that my best friend, and she was also my cousin, was my roommate, and she was a year ahead of me. So I kind of just fell into college without much problem, even though you have to remember I was a farm girl, fresh off the farm, in a very rural community. So I was pretty naive. My sophomore year, I transferred to Colorado A&M, and because my fiance was a senior there and on the football team, so I transferred there for that year, knowing that it was only going to be for 1 year because we were planning to get married after he graduated.
This looks like your parents here.
Yes, those are my parents. When they were younger, and my dad's name was Kenneth Ray Moorhead, and my mom's name was Dorothy Ann Moorhead, Diviney Moorhead. This is a picture of my husband and I at our August 13th, 1950 wedding. Raymond Keith Loper. He was also from Olathe. We had a lot of mutual friends, but however, he was 4 years older than I.
That's a beautiful dress you're wearing.
Oh, well, I did make that myself. My mother was a seamstress and had made my prom dresses and all that, and for some reason I ended up making my wedding dress. I really don't remember why, but I did do that. That was a major part of my life, as you'll soon find out. He was a coach, and as a coach, you have to, in order to move up on the ladder of success, you have to move every few years to a bigger school and a better team. So in the first 10 years of our married life, we moved 6 times to 6 different play areas. We moved more often than that because in some of the towns we moved more than once in the town. Our oldest son, Ray, was born in Center, Colorado. Raymond Keith, he is named after his father, but he goes by Ray, always has. And my older 2 daughters, Kay Ann and Kim, were born in Brighton, Colorado. The last place among those 6 different places was Walla Walla, Washington, where Keith got a job at Whitman College, a nice liberal arts school, rather a little bit on the prestigious side. And It was a great time for us because we were there for 7 years, and two wonderful things happened then. We had our fourth daughter, and it was a surprise. About 10 years after the first three were born, but the kids were so excited about it. We all were, and her name was Kara Sue. She was a little bit of a princess because they spoiled her. The kids spoiled her, not me. And
And how long did you live in Wallawash?
we were there. We were there 7 years. 7 years.
And did you do any activism there?
Not very much. You know what I did? I had a wonderful opportunity. I could attend Whitman College, and I could work on my degree. Remember, I've only had 2 years, and so I took all the requireds I could possibly take and a few electives. However, the main reason was I still didn't have a major. I took every year I went, didn't have a major, couldn't decide what I wanted to be. I did not want to be a teacher, and I did not want to be a secretary. I was pretty naive. I didn't really know what I could do. I'd never been told I couldn't do anything, but I didn't know what I could do. Shortly after Kara Sue was born, Keith had the opportunity to take a job here. And
Where is here?
Reno, in Reno, Nevada, at the University of Nevada, as the line coach in football and the wrestling coach. Well, it was quite a change from all of Washington. The day we left, every tree in town it was Mother's Day, and I mean, the day we came to look at a house. Everything was in bloom up there, everything, and it had snowed here the week before. So needless to say, it was quite a change. But we did move here that year, that fall we came, and Kara was now about 18 months old, and I still not only didn't have my degree, I didn't have any job experience. I'd been busy raising kids, and the first year I really didn't do a lot except be with my kids and get them started in school and learning, just learning college life a little here. But I knew I had to do something soon.
Now, with 4 children, it was pretty hard to make it on a coach's salary.
Yes, it was, and that's the reason that I did have to find a job before too long. Moving to Reno, we were welcomed by different members of Keith's department, and it was a fun time. We bought a house off of 7th Street on Bowman Street, and we lived there for 30 years. We added, and during that time, we added 800 square feet to the house. And actually, Keith did most of the work. It took 5 years to do it because he could only do it at certain times, mostly in the summer. But I knew I had to find a job. I started to register at UNR, and then I thought, no, that's going to take too long. Can't wait that long, 2 years probably, and then find a job. So when I was in Walla Walla, I had gotten familiar with and had learned how to use knit and stretch fabric, which was new to the business of fabrics because you had to buy it ready-made. I had done a lot of sewing before. I'd made most of my little children's clothes and some of my own clothes, and so I took lessons up there in knit and stretch sewing. And so when I came here, a friend of mine said, "Diane, you need to open a store. They don't have that down there." And so I did. I opened a very small knit and stretch fabric store in the Green Bay Shopping Center, which probably wasn't the best location. The name of my store was Diane's Knit and Stretch Fabrics, Viking Sewing Machines, because I got the franchise for Viking Sewing Machines. Well, about just a few weeks after, a month or so after I opened the store, I had a surprise. I was pregnant. And now what do? It was a dilemma, but I guess I just felt there wasn't anything I could do but do it. And I knew that I was safe for a few months because I always had easy pregnancies, and so I wasn't worried about that. Well, a very lucky thing happened. I had several lucky things happen in my lifetime, and this particular one was that Keith had recruited a young man, Bob Moore, who for his wrestling team, and he was newly married man, and his bride was named Nancy Moore, and she came to work for me. She had some experience, sales experience. She was fantastic, smart, all I could ask for, and that saved me and saved my store. Then from there, I knew I had to move the store, though, because it was not a good location. So I moved my store to Park Lane, and I was out there for several years. But when I first went out there, again, a new dilemma. I had to be open almost twice as many hours as I had to be before, and so one of my customers came in one day. One of my favorite customers came in one day, and she said, "Diane, if you ever need anybody to help you, I'd like to work for you just a few hours a week." Isabel Mayberry came to work for me. She was older than me, which was good, and she was retired, very good seamstress, and she worked for me also for the rest of the years I had the store. She was an amazing woman.
So did you have business experience?
No, no. I didn't, and I never liked being in business. I loved the customers. Loved working with the people. I hated being in business.
And yet, how long did you have the store?
Probably about 12 years. I didn't have it quite that long there. Actually, what happened was the business changed because Milan came to town, and they had a far more knit and stretch fabric than I did. They weren't teaching classes right away. I was teaching a lot of t-shirt classes and swimsuit classes. But so what I did was I just sold all my fabric out, and quilting was coming back into popularity. So I opened a quilt store out at Old Town Mall, a cute little quilt shop upstairs. I really liked it, but I still didn't want to be in business. And so I couldn't figure out what I was going to do about that. And one day, again, a very lucky thing happened to me. 2 customers walked in one day, 2 of my women customers, and said, "Would you be interested in selling your store?" And I said, "I sure would." And that was the happiest day of my life. Bar none, that was the happiest day of my life. Now, what was I going to do? Yeah, what was I going to do? I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to go back to UNR, and I was going to and I was going to finish. And I knew what my major was. I was going to be a social worker. So I was enrolled in the social work in the university, and my first social work class was Introduction to Social Work. That was one of the biggest changes for me in my life. I now had a major, and it was social work. I was so excited, and I enrolled in Introduction to Social Work, and Ellen Pillard, I'm pretty sure, was the instructor, and she required that we have a volunteer experience. I had a hard time deciding because I knew a lot about these other organizations, sort of, but I didn't know what I didn't know what CAW was. I didn't know what the Committee to Aid Abused Women was, really.
What do you mean you didn't? What is CAW?
CAW is the Committee to Aid Abused Women. That was a life experience, changing experience for me. Because being at CAW, yes, because the Committee to Aid Abused Women, that's what CAW stands for in this day and age. Because Joni Kaiser was a great mentor. I learned so much from that group. All the women that worked there were fantastic, and it did change my life.
Did you know much about domestic violence before?
No, oh no, I didn't know anything about it, but I certainly learned. I was on the crisis line. Once I finished that volunteer experience, I stayed for like 7 or 8 more years.
Stayed as a volunteer?
Volunteering for them. I never worked for them, and I volunteered for them for several years while I was doing other things. I did almost everything they had to do. I helped with support groups. I helped teach the volunteer groups. I was on the board of directors. I helped Kathy Fulkerson named the Hannah Humanitarian Award. It was a very challenging and rewarding time, really, great opportunities. I also got to learn about another group, the Nevada Network Against Domestic Violence, which Joni had formed out of CAW. And the day after practically, not the day after probably, but a week or so after, it seems like, after I graduated, she stopped me and said, "Let's go talk." And I said, and she said, would you be interested in being the first executive director for NNADB? And I said, I would. And so for about the next 2 or 3 years, I did not keep that job very long. It was a great job, and I really enjoyed it. And one of the things I got to do when I was in that position was I got to fly in the state plane to all the programs, because what NNADB is a membership program. All of the programs in the state belong to it. There was a program in Vegas, here, Battle Mountain, Fallon, Ely, Elko. I believe those were the. We did not go to. Of course, we did not go to Las Vegas because we were touring rural programs. That was a great experience, along with many other ones that I had during the time that I was there. I didn't stay in that position, as I say, for very long, because I think the reason I left, I don't remember why I left, but I think the reason I left is I never did really like being in charge of anything. I always wanted to be at the ground level working with the people, and that's the reason I had enjoyed my time at CAW so much. So I took a little time off at that time, and I guess right now I need to back up and catch myself up with the other part of my life. And that's what's been hard, because my life was like this, 2 different things happening at the same time. When I first came to Reno, I, before very long, joined the Women's Political Caucus. I've always been kind of interested, even before that, I was interested in causes. Before I came to Reno, the first cause I got involved in was civil rights. I remember walking in some demonstrations in Walla Walla, and I just knew that was my passion. I didn't really know it, but I did know it, I guess is what I would say, because all my life, to this day, that is my passion. I've been definitely dedicated to all other things, women's rights, everything, but to me, civil rights covers everything. And so that's a part of all the different causes that we all talk about, for me anyway. So I came here and I thought, well, okay, Women's Political Caucus, I'll do that. Was helped with, the first time I met Vivian Freeman was at an ERA meeting.
And who was Vivian Freeman?
Vivian Freeman was my representative. Actually, I don't think she was yet then, but she was very soon after that. I met Vivian Freeman at an ERA meeting, and it just went from there that I just was always was working, whatever was working, but I was also involved in some cause, and it became the Women's Political Caucus. I enjoyed that group of women. I met some really strong women at that time that belonged and were pushing that. But as time went on, caucus started going down in membership, and because we no longer had any women we could find to run for office. We had Sue Agner's, Jan Evans was already there, Vivian Freeman was already there, and we were having a really hard time. In fact, the last one I think that we sort of promoted was Dinah Glom. And so this was happening all over the country. It was kind of moving away from that into other causes and issues. And at the last national meeting that I went to, which I think was in St. Paul, but not 100% sure, I heard about women's lobbies. Well, I got really excited about that, because that was more down my line of work that I really wanted to be involved in, because primarily they were organizations that lobbied on women's issues, and they particularly on women, ADC women for sure, single moms. I think it was in 1988 that I went to the last National Women's Political Caucus campaign conference, and that's where I learned about women's lobbies. I came back, and during that time, that's after I had left the network, I was just doing this type of work, volunteering type. That was in 1983 that Joni asked me to be the executive director. During that time, we grew.
We talked about CAW, and now in about 83, you were with NNADV and the first executive director, and I know there were some things you wanted to add, some maybe public policy stuff or whatever that you wanted to add.
Yes, one of the things that I got to do when I was with NNADV was to be on the national network against domestic violence, which was a powerful, extremely powerful women. I had never been in the presence of that many powerful women at once. It's when I went to my first meeting in Washington, D.C., and 25, 30 women there. Amazing. I learned what white power was when they first talked about a white power workshop. I thought, what in the world is that? You know, I'd never experienced anything that would help me understand that. Things like that. I'd never been in the presence of lesbians before, and that there are a number of lesbians in the battered women's movement in those days. It was powerful, and I discovered something there that I brought back to Nevada, and that was protection orders for women in domestic violence cases. I had heard Jean Doss when I was talking with her, I shared an office with her, and I would hear her talking to battered women saying, there isn't anything we can do. There's no law for a domestic violence protection order. You can get a civil protection order, but you can't get a domestic violence one. And so I found model legislation back at that conference, or that workshop. And that was so exciting because I came back with that, told Joni about it. She said, go for it. So I called Sue Wagner, and she agreed to carry the bill, to support the bill, or sponsor the bill, and it passed without a problem.
And that was 1985.
And coincidentally, at the same time, a bill passed in that same session, sponsored by somebody from the South, a mandatory arrest law, and I got to be the lobbyist on that issue. So by the end of that session, Nevada had come from way down here in just domestic violence laws that protected women to almost the top. We were right up there. It was a great time for women and for me as an activist. During 88 and 89, I was no longer affiliated with any one group. Now I'm not working. I have a little bit of time on my hands. And I was still up there active with the Women's Political Caucus, though. And that was the time that, as I said before, they were kind of winding down a little bit. And I went back to that National Women's Political Caucus conference, and lo and behold, I picked up a brochure there, I guess it was, I actually saw a workshop, and I attended the workshop on women's lobbies. And I got really excited about that. Came back, told everybody I could think about it, and ran into a young woman, Sarah Chavilacek, who I found out had been in it with the lobby in Wyoming. She just recently moved here. And I thought, oh, wow. I said, would you be willing to talk to a group? And she said, oh, I'd love to talk to a group, but I can't help get it started because I'm new here and I'm trying to get situated. And she talked to a group, and that group meshed finally after we're meeting twice a week twice a month for literally probably 6 months at least. Turned out to be the Nevada Women's Lobby. I was fortunate enough to be one of the founding members.
In 1989.
In 1989, we came together as a group publicly. We had a public meeting at the old YMCA building. No, the YWCA building, and we sent flyers out announcing ourselves, and we had like 50 or 60 people that showed up and showed an interest in it, so we knew that maybe we had something. And we continued on, and it became a very powerful organization and is still operating. We just had our lobby just had their 30th anniversary this last January, and I was honored by receiving the Maya Miller Award. It was truly an honor. I knew Maya and had some time spent some time with her from once in a while, and we had named we appreciated her work and help and wanted to name our organization after her. And it isn't given every year. It's given when they feel like the time is right for somebody to receive it. We met twice a week for, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months. There were anywhere from 8 to 10 of us in that group. It narrowed down to, I believe, 6 members.
Where did you meet?
In the steering committee. We met generally in Elaine Anderson's home because she had small children at that time. She was university faculty. She was, I believe she was head of the women's studies program, if that or either in the sociology department, one or the other, or maybe both. So we always met at her house, and which was great because it meant that none of us had to worry about hosting it. And we hashed out our bylaws. We worked so hard on our mission statement, and we had it all down before we ever went to our general meeting for the public, which was the January meeting in 1989. That was our first year. The session was going to be in session that year. And we had agreed that we would not take part in the session other than to go down and learn. That was going to be our learning session. And then we were going to start the next session. Well, that didn't work out very well because the first thing out of the chute was an ADC bill, funding bill. And we knew that was one of the reasons we'd formed. So we had to lobby on that.
What was the funding bill?
The ADC bill. The Aid for Dependent Children.
Okay.
And at that point, the stipend that they received was criminally low. I have to stop and explain a little bit more about why we started, because it's such an important part of who the lobby is. The more we talked about starting a lobby and we talked about what our mission was, we agreed that we wanted to be a voice in Carson City for those that did not have a voice. And as we thought about it, the group that we thought of most, because after all, we were coming out of the women's movement, so we knew that that's where we had to put our emphasis because there were so many gaps in their needs. And we wanted to particularly pick people who definitely did not have any voice down there. We developed over the time, and by the time we had our meeting in January, we had developed that mission statement. Now, it's different now than it was then, but only because we've expanded it a little bit more. The basic concept is still there. And I'm going to ask Mary Lee, I can't read it because I can't see, but Mary Lee is going to read it to you.
Nevada Women's Lobby is a voice for women and children. We're dedicated to equity, nonviolence, and reproductive choice. The lives of all people are inherently valuable and worthy of respect and dignity. Therefore, we actively work to remove barriers of race, class, age, gender, religion, physical ability, sexual orientation, and gender identity and expression. Beginning with our own actions and language, we promote nonviolence in all aspects of personal, economic, and organizational relationships. We support every woman's right to reproductive choice and self-determination. Very nice, Diane.
That is the expanded one. I couldn't find a copy of the one the very first one we did, but it was basically the same, except that we did not include family. It was just women and children, but it did cover all those same issues. I think when we started lobbying down in Carson, it was tough because no one never had really come down there with those issues solely in mind. The only reason Lobby is still alive today is because of one person, and that one person is Bobby Gang. Bobby was our lobbyist for probably 8 or 10 years. I can't remember. But she gave us a good reputation down there because she was honest, she was ethical, she was very calm, and but she presented our views and our ideas very well. And she was so dedicated. She was so dedicated. She was on our steering committee too. And believe me, once the session was over with, she was right back working with every issue we ever had. There's one story that we used to tell about Bobby when she was during the session. We had talked to her the night before, and we talked about some of the things we needed to do. And she sent out an email the next morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. And this is what she called us. That's what she emailed us. I'm sorry. She emailed us like at 11 o'clock at night, and said something about something we needed to do the next day, or start or something. And then she called us at 7 o'clock the next morning and asked us if we'd done it. It was funny because she wasn't even aware. She just knew that we had to get started on it. And I think she probably forgot that she called us at 11 o'clock at night. She didn't get back from Carson until, sometimes 7 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night. And yet she was down there every morning, drove back and forth every day. And believe me, she never got paid enough to ever, probably much more than pay for her gas.
Well,
She was
that's really wonderful.
truly
I'm really
amazing.
Glad to hear that. And
Totally committed to our cause.
moving on now, I'm really interested in the work with the Reno City Attorney's Office. And as we come to the end, we cannot forget that part of your...
Yes, well, that overlapped, of course, with lobbying. In 1990, Patricia Lynch called me and asked me to go to lunch with her. I knew Patricia well. I'd worked on her campaigns. She had done a lot of volunteering at CAW when I was volunteering with Carl. So I knew Patricia pretty well. And so we went to have lunch, and she said, "Diane, guess what?" I said, "What?" She said, this is her into her second year of being Reno City Attorney. She said, "I finally got a position available. I can hire you as my first domestic violence victim advocate in the state that works in the prosecutor's office." In other words, I was able, during the time I was the victim advocate there, I developed a program, and I made it so, well, go back just a bit. Bill John Gardner was the head of the criminal division, and she had let him know that it was no longer, that the department, the prosecutor's office was no longer to be dropping domestic violence cases willy-nilly, which they had been, and that they would try to get those matters to either plead or go to trial and get them into a batterers treatment program with a suspended sentence. And that was her goal. And my part of it was that I was to help the victim go to court, and which I did from 1990 to 1997. It's a great program. I will always credit her with coming up with a very progressive program. I don't know that there never has been, as far as I know, one in the state quite like it. So, and probably not too many around the country. So that is something I'm very proud of.
And when you left the Reno City Attorney's Office, can you reach that bowl over there? This is what they gave you. Reno, best wishes. Diane Loper, best wishes. Reno City Attorney's Office, 1990 to 1997. What a nice
Thank you.
Gift they gave you.
Yes, it was. That was a wonderful time there. While I was there, by the way, they hired another woman to help me, and her name was Lori Brown. And she again saved me because she came on board when I was really, the caseload was mounting because they could no longer dismiss cases. So we had a lot more cases to go to court with. And she was an absolutely amazing young woman, much younger than I, but taught me so much because she was a battered woman, and a very seriously battered woman. And I learned so much more. I understood. That's when I truly understood what it was all about and why Women's Day and all those things. She used to speak different places, and I was always in awe of her when I would hear her tell her story.
Was this advocate position that you were the first person to be in that position? Was that ever replicated anywhere else that in the state that you know of, or?
Not that I know of. It's a tough job to put it in because of the way law enforcement and the prosecutors work. It was only because of Patricia that it happened, and I don't think it was ever replicated anywhere in the state quite to the. I think maybe they did have victims advocate that went to court, but it was not just that, it was the fact that she made them introduce the no drop policy. They had to continue the case another time and come back if they didn't either plead or go to trial. And so, because most of the time they were guilty. It was rare that they wouldn't be guilty because the police were right there, saw the bruises, everything, and arrested. And we had that report. So,
The wives tended to drop some of the wives tended to.
even they couldn't.
Yeah.
Because they weren't the one arrested.
Yeah.
The police officer arrested.
Yeah.
Yeah. They requested the drop. Well, I will tell you one little story about that. That's probably why it was such a strong, one reason it was such a strong program. About a month or so after I came, we had a case of a young couple came in, and she'd been battered, and they pleaded with the attorney to drop the case. She said it would never happen again. She was sure it was done. They were getting along fine, and so same thing. And of course, that was before they had the no drop policy, and really started. It was just being initiated. It wasn't in play, but it came in play after that, because about a month or two later, he killed her, and then he killed himself. And so that got everybody's attention.
Yeah.
And that the program did go on from there. There have been other programs similar around the country, because Patricia first learned about having that kind of an advocate in court in a program in Seattle, I believe it was, in some of her travels.
Well, so now that you're retired, do you know if that program is still going strong?
Well, it's a program that depends on the city attorney's office, and that's an elected office. As long as Bill Gardner was there, yes, it did go on. However, when the next city attorney came on, he did not believe in it, and it almost fell completely apart. It would have, had it not been for Suzanne Ramos, who took my place when I left and was working with Lori. Lori then left and went to the police department as an advocate over there, and now Suzanne is there, and it did almost, because the prosecutors gradually started dropping cases, and but she stayed there. She stuck it out. I'll have to give her a lot of credit because she stuck it out. And the present Reno City Attorney now has adopted the program again. I don't know whether it's quite as strong in that how much, if the advocates have as much power as I had, you might say, because that was because of Patricia.
And because of you.
I guess maybe. I was old.
You were dedicated.
I was 60. I was 60. I was 60 years old when I got that job, and so I knew everybody there was so much younger than me, and so I think that I had that. I have to admit, I think I had that advantage. So I didn't feel that much older.
So, congratulations.
Thank you.
When did you receive you've gotten a couple of awards that I haven't you haven't mentioned before. One is the Women Helping Women Award from Seroptimus International. Um,
I don't really know exactly why I got that award, but it was during my activism, you might say, through caucus and then through the city attorney's office. I think most of those awards came from being in the Reno city attorney's office.
yeah, because you were really making a difference there.
Yeah, and because I wasn't a member of Seroptimus, so it wasn't that reason.
And what about the Nevada Women's Fund Women of Achievement Award?
I got that because of Reno City. That I was their candidate, and because of the work I was doing. Mm-hmm.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, as we go through all this, I wanted to know, first of all, you mentioned campaigning for different women. You campaigned for Patricia Lynch, you said, and you campaigned for somebody, Doherty, Francis.
Well, yes, I guess I got my feet wet in campaigning with Patricia because when she ran her first campaign, she lost that campaign, but I was right there with her. That's where I learned to help, to work on campaigns at that level, because she was her own campaign manager, you might say, and I worked right with her on that. And then it kind of got in my blood. I walked for all women candidates that I could possibly. I walked a lot for Vivian because she was my legislator, and she always had coffee and donuts for her. She treated her walkers very well.
And somebody McCarthy.
Then the other two that I worked well, okay.
You mentioned a McCarthy.
Barbara McCarthy was one of the prosecutors in our office, an excellent attorney. And she left to run for a judgeship in a municipal court judge in Sparks. And she asked me if I'd help her with her campaign, and I said I'd love to. Well, at that time I had a bone spur on my Achilles tendon. I couldn't really walk that well, so I couldn't walk for her. But I planned and plotted out all her walks for her. And on the weekends, so that she could walk, I babysat for her. She didn't have a baby, but she had two little kids. I kid sat for her. And we usually then planned the next week's campaign then. And then...
it just makes you love women when you hear stories like that, Diane.
Thank you.
So what about Frances Doherty?
And then a few years later, I had met Frances Doherty. She was then, worked in the courts with the family court. She was in a family court type. It wasn't called a judge, but I can't remember the title. Mm-hmm. And I'd gotten to know her, and she's just such a wonderful woman. And and so when she was thinking about running for family court judge, she asked me if I'd have coffee with her, and I think her husband maybe, I'm not sure who else was there. And we went, and she said, I just want to know what you think about me running for judgeship. And I said, it's fantastic, please do. And so she kind of picked my brain a little bit about what it would entail and what I thought. And she said, I'm not, I know you're busy. I'm not really, don't expect you to help, do that much, but, whatever you can. Well, I wanted her to win. So she had two people that basically ran her campaign for her, because she was busy, and her husband was working full-time. And I can't remember the man's name.
And you were busy and had 5 children. So.
Well, by that time, they were up there.
We reached the last parts of this interview. I would like to ask you some of your philosophies, and I'd like to know, you've mentioned a couple of transformative experiences, and like in CAW, first coming and first learning about battered women, and having people come, and the women that came and bought your shop, that was lucky for you, and when you went to work for NNADV, and then do you have any others that you'd like to talk about, or can you talk about what you've learned? Have you learned something like have you ever felt like you at first felt insufficient and then got over that? I mean, imagine being the first victim's advocate. You never did. You always felt sure you
I
could
just
do
knew
it.
I had, that was my father. He always did what he had to do. He was a jack of all trades and a master of almost every one of them.
Yeah.
And he just always did what he had to do. And I guess that's always been my attitude. I
And
just do what I have to do.
You felt it as a mission too, don't you think?
I guess I did. I must have. As I said before, I think it was in my DNA.
And I wondered how you'd like to be remembered outside of your importance to your family. And I know you don't like to talk about yourself, but how would you? How would you?
As someone who cares about people, in particular about those that are not treated equally, I think it goes back. I just, as long as I can remember, I just don't understand. To this day, I don't understand why people hate people for no reason, no real reason. I just don't understand that. So I guess just somebody who really cared about making a difference, and people.
That was a wonderful statement. But let me ask this, because there are young women that probably have ideas like this, but aren't sure if they're even capable of it. What would be your message to young
My
women?
message is that right now, we better have a lot of young people, particularly I think women, who can change the world. Because if they don't, I don't know how long we'll have a democracy.
Yeah.
I think the road ahead for the young people today is just amazing. And I think, to be honest, I think young men also have come a long ways in changing their attitudes towards women. I think it's a changing world. I just hope that the naysayers and the people who hate people don't win, and the millennials win.
Okay. Well, thank you.
One other thing I do want to say, because I remember you mentioned when we were talking about this, about books. There is one book that for me is an amazing book, and I just wish everybody would read it. And it's a book by John Lewis, the representative in Congress,
Yes.
and the work he's done, and it's about his life. I was a little bit just starting to get active during the civil rights movement, and I remember thinking how horrible it was, but I didn't really. I was too busy. I was raising kids. I didn't have time to do much. But he tells you, blow by blow, practically, what the civil rights movement was, because he started when I believe he was 16 years old in it. Didn't go to college then, and now he's a representative in the Congress. Mm-hmm. His whole life has been devoted to this work. And I just think it's a book that, and then at the end, he does a little thing about his philosophy of life. And I just want everybody to read it. It's called Walking with the Wind, John Lewis.
Walking with the Wind?
John Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane.